You can take a look at our speaker today, Rupert. But what I was actually really interested in immediately when I heard about the topic as an MBA of CEIBS, so I immediately went to their website. So I downloaded this report. So today we have the rare opportunity to actually get his own, I call it barometer, the insights of what these facts and figures mean. And I was actually taken by surprise that currently there are over 58% of companies in China are actively, heavily recruiting, increasing their headcount. And then amongst all of us, 88% that are currently employed, having a job, we are looking for our next new opportunities. Okay, 88%. So take a look at your colleague. Maybe there won't be your colleague tomorrow. But what do these numbers mean? What do these numbers mean as a manager for you? I'm sure you guys are working in teams. What's going to be the future working trend? And what exactly, for example, I always hear a lot of people, oh, we have strategies to attain, attract, and keep our young talents. How do you do that? Is bonus and salary still the main strategy? So I think a lot of insights that we can kind of explore together today. So let us welcome Rupert.
So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Professor Ding and the team at CEIBS for inviting myself to speak today and to invite my colleagues here also. What I'm going to try and do today is to give you some insight into the employment market as it stands at the moment, not just in China, but also in the Asia-Pac region overall, although most of the data and the detailed numbers will be more about China. And then later on, I'm going to be, I guess, giving my view, it's my personal view on what people can do to maximize their career, whether they're looking to move jobs and how to manage that in a smart way, or whether they're just looking at their long-term career and how they actively manage that and plan that. So I'll give you my observations on that at the end. I hope you find the content useful. So before I get into the report, let me explain a little bit about PageGroup and who we are, and of course, where we derive our data from, if that's okay. So as a business, we're a global search firm. We've been in the Asia-Pac region in China for over 25 years. So in that time, we've built a pretty deep network, and that network gives us access to data and insights. Now, in terms of the business structure that we have, it's a whole mix of brands. It's executive search through the Page Exec brand, traditional search and selection for mid-level management and senior management opportunities. And the Page Personnel brand really covers what we call part qualified professionals. So that's the basic structure of the organization we have here. We also have an outsourcing business as well for some of our clients need high volume recruitment projects delivered where they fully outsource the entire program to us. So that's a little bit about our mix as a business. A few points specifically in China. So the way we're structured is highly specialized. You can see some of the discipline and industry specialisms on this slide here. So all of our consultants are very specialized. That's relevant to the content we're going to provide because a lot of the content comes from the one-on-one relationships with employers, with candidates and employees in the market. And so we get that depth of understanding. The services we offer are pretty broad as well. So it's not just permanent appointments and hiring that we do. We also have a contracting business. And interestingly, in China, contracting or interim assignments is growing. It's fairly immature here, but we've seen this happen in other markets previously where it starts off slowly, but grows very, very quickly. So we see that as a trend. So we do that here. And then if you look at our client mix, it's very diverse as well. So it's a whole mixture of organizations. It's from SMEs through to large global firms. It includes about half of our client mix in China is foreign firms. Half of it are domestic firms, mainly privately held domestic firms. Small percentage of state-owned enterprise as well. So it's a pretty diverse group of clients and candidates that we work with. Now, in terms of the report itself, just a few points here. So we derived this data at the back end of last year about this year. We published this in late January. So some of the numbers may be a little bit out of date now, but the general trends are absolutely still valid. So don't worry too much about the specific numbers. It's more the trends I want to try and convey today. The way we generated this is from a whole load of research and surveys and one-on-one interviews with both employers, as in hiring managers, HR managers, and then also employees and active candidates. So if you look at the Asia-Pac region, it was about 5,500 companies that we engaged with on this. So it's a big undertaking, it's a big sample, and about 21,000 employees or active candidates. And when you look at that total sample, about a third of it is China. And then the rest of it is the rest of Asia Pac and Australia. So that gives you a little bit of understanding of where we've got this from. So look, we're going to go through the hiring market outlook as I see it now. We're going to talk a little bit about talent attraction and retention. Some of you may be hiring managers. Some of you may be looking for work in the future. So I think it's relevant to everybody, even if it's just to understand the dynamic and the expectations between employers and employees, between hiring managers and candidates, to understand what's going on and where the gaps are. And if you are actively looking, how you can manage your job search accordingly. Finally, at the end, I'm going to give you some industry insights. And on those slides, there's a lot of numbers. So again, don't worry about the numbers. I'll just give you the general commentary, okay? So when we look at the market outlook as we see it now, there's a lot to be positive about, especially in China. The domestic market, privately held Chinese firms, it's been incredibly resilient. If I go back to the first half of last year, around February, March time, and somebody told me by the end of the year, you'll be hitting record quarters by Q4, I wouldn't have believed it. You know, the amount of uncertainty we had at the time. And what we saw happen, let's take Shanghai as an example. When you look at our own hiring volumes, which is a good indicator of the market, 2018, 2019, Shanghai, our client mix was 20% privately held domestic Chinese firms, and the rest was basically foreign firms. Whereas by the end of last year and going into this year, it's 50-50. So there's been a dramatic shift in our client mix. Partially, that's our own effort to do that, but partially it's just the market. The domestic market became very hot in early H2, and that's continued. And we see that in some of the numbers here. So look, the good news is, despite the challenges, top talent is still very much in demand, mainly because of the domestic Chinese firms. Another point is the digitization. So as I'm sure you all know, through COVID, it's really accelerated how companies are digitizing in every aspect of how they run themselves, be it internal stuff, be it customer-facing initiatives. And we see that trend only accelerating further in the second half of this year. And the other big trend that came out of our research was flexibility. And I use the term flexibility very broadly here. I'll break that down later on for you, but it's a whole load of things. It's not just about employee flexibility, it's a few things. So I'll touch on that in a bit more detail also. So let's look at the recovery. So in China, we've got some data there about the economic situation, which I'm not going to go into in detail because Professor Ding might correct me later, so I'm not going to go into that. But I think it's safe to say that the economy is very robust and doing well. And you can see here on the average headcount increases when we were surveying employers, you can see that the domestic market, they were looking on average, increasing headcount by 11 to 20%, which as an average is pretty significant across an entire market compared to 1 to 10% within the foreign firms. So you can see there just how the economic situation and how different markets are behaving is translating into hiring activity. And you can also see it in compensation and benefits as well in China. So you can see on average salary increases, which would have happened in the first quarter of this year, that that on average, domestic firms, the salary increases will double. And it's the same with bonuses as well. Bonus expectations being paid are significantly higher with domestic. So it's safe to say that there's I guess you'd say that in the current market in China, domestic firms, for those ambitious, able, committed people, there's an argument that they probably offer faster track progression at the moment. And these things come and go, but that's where we are at the moment as we see it. If I look at the APAC region, there's some quite interesting stuff in here. So look, obviously the pandemic has had a significant influence, mainly negative, on a lot of these markets. If you look at India, and obviously right now, they're in a pretty dark place. Indonesia, you know, it's really hit hiring there. The same in the Philippines. Currently, Japan are in an extended state of emergency. Singapore have still got pretty significant restrictions going on. So the impact's been material when it comes to hiring, because if you think about traditional hiring, it's dependent on people meeting. And that's tough when there's a global pandemic on. And yes, tools like Teams can go some way to alleviating that. And they have done, but they're not the silver bullet for getting things fully back to normal where certain markets are still in lockdown. That said, it's not all bad, obviously. So like I said, in China, well, I think if I use our own commentary, our own business again, and how we're seeing the market, that's about the most accurate representation that I can give you. In China, we've had the best start to the year ever, which is pretty surprising. Again, if someone had told me that back in February last year, I wouldn't have believed that. And again, it's driven by this buoyant domestic market. If you look at Japan, even though they're in an extended state of emergency, hiring volumes there have actually been pretty good. So some markets, even though they are in a challenging situation, are still proving to be fairly resilient in terms of hiring. Australia is an interesting one. So that's rebounded fairly quickly. Seek, who is the main job board in Australia, is citing that they've got record advertising volumes, better than they've ever had. So there's obviously a lot of pent-up demand in the market in Asia Pac, and we're starting to see that come through. On a point on where the heat is in the market, technology and healthcare in particular, and I'll talk more about those later on. And we're seeing, particularly in healthcare, but true of internet as well, we're seeing demand significantly outstrip supply. We're seeing that putting upward pressure on salaries as well in the region, and particularly in China. And one point of note for people who are looking to move jobs or to look at a new job and they're looking at overseas moves, it's really hard at the moment. We're seeing hardly any cross-border moves for obvious reasons. And we get lots of candidates coming to us saying, yeah, here are my top 3 locations. But actually the reality is now, most candidates, the only locations they're going to be able to secure work in is where they physically are now or the country of their passport. Outside of that, it's pretty tough. And I'm sure later this year into next year, or I hope, that will improve. So that's a little bit on APAC. This slide here talks a little bit about where we see in China specifically the hottest markets and the highest growth in hiring activity. So no surprises, tech and healthcare, but also manufacturing, industrial. Let's call it industrial because it's broader than manufacturing. I'll talk about that in a bit of detail later because it's quite a big picture and there's lots of segments to it. Financial services and consumer have also been good. And again, most of this across the domestic market in China. And then there's the issue of going digital. So 68% of companies intend to increase investment this year, and we only see that continuing through H2 and into next year. And yes, it's communication tools and collaboration suites, but the big one for me in terms of people completing their MBA, thinking about their future career, it's this issue around how companies engage with customers. So future leaders, even more so, need to be great at embracing innovation in technology and how they use that to engage with customers better. Process I'm going through at the moment myself. And then the fourth one, this idea of flexibility. What do I mean by that? Well, it's a few things. On this deck, this slide here, sorry, 53% of companies coming into this year expected significant levels of restructuring through the year. And restructuring is a broad term. That could be people, it can be processes, it can be systems. But obviously, again, change management more than ever is an important skill that leaders need to have. And what we're seeing in such a dynamic environment, leaders who can deliver change in an empathetic way is really, really important. So putting people first when you deliver change. I mentioned that contracting in China is something that's really growing. It's one of our fastest growing markets, and that's because that's the nature of the market at the moment. We saw a big jump on LinkedIn, for example, in terms of the volume of contracting jobs being advertised last year through the pandemic compared to the year before. We're only seeing that continue. And on this idea of digitization, that's where we see a lot of the action in contracting. It's this idea that companies need to transform. And often companies don't always have the skills internally to do that. More and more in China, they're happy to go out and buy that in temporarily to get the projects delivered and to get these new ideas embedded. So that's an ongoing trend. So it's redesign, it's different ways of hiring. And then the obvious thing about flexibility is giving employees flexibility. It's a really important hot subject at the moment. I'm going to come back to that point later. In this environment where issues like health and well-being and flexibility, employees are asking for more from employers than ever. And I think, again, for somebody who is, from a career perspective, I'll use those words again, ambitious, able, and committed, there's an opportunity here from a mindset perspective to really accelerate their careers in an environment where a lot of employees are coming to the table with an attitude of what are you going to give me rather than what can I do for you? And that mindset is the difference between a future leader who's extremely successful and someone that perhaps plateaus. So I'll talk more about that later. So a little bit more on the contracting. So we were talking to our network about how they use contracting. And what's interesting is when you look at where a company has a particular skills gap, what are the different ways HR or hiring managers will look to address those skills gap? Contracting's come right up. New hiring is still number one if they don't have the skill internally. Training their existing people is number two, but we now see contracting. People are looking at that as a serious option. So like I said earlier, buying in those skills. And where we see the contracting market most prevalent, it's in, from a discipline perspective, this is now not a sector perspective, is in the finance discipline, it's in technology, it's in marketing and digital, it's in procurement, supply chain. And again, I think the reasons being here, again, companies are digitizing and there's lots of change going on. It's people change, it's systems change, it's different channels to market. It's a lot to deal with, and companies more and more are ready to buy in that skill set, digitally savvy change agents that can make things happen. And they're extremely well paid and extremely valuable. So we see this market continuing to grow in China and elsewhere. So look, that concludes the market outlook, what are the trends that we see at the moment. The next few slides is really insight on people's expectations, what employers are thinking, what hiring managers and HR are thinking, what employees and candidates who are actively looking are thinking, particularly around those two issues of attraction and retention of talent. And you'll see there's some gaps in expectations. And that produces particularly challenges for employers where there's a gap in expectations, whether it's hiring new people or trying to retain their existing people. But again, those people who are ambitious, able, committed, really focused on their career, there's opportunities to take advantage of this environment. So, as mentioned earlier, 88% of people anticipate looking for a new role this year. When we launch this, we do a media roundtable every year. And then we present it later on in the day to a load of HRDs in Shanghai. And whenever people see these numbers, they get really concerned. And they're not as concerning as you would think. Just because 88% of people anticipate looking for a new role doesn't mean they're actually going to move. This is just expectation. So I just want to stress that. Almost half of them are actively looking, half are passive. So they're open, but they're not putting effort in. And you can see here that no surprises, some of the sectors coming into this year, where they were most active for the markets that were hit the most last year. Well, there's a few themes we've seen in terms of how behaviors of candidates when they're looking are changing and what it means for employers trying to attract them. This is a good example. We talked to those 21,000 candidates and employees about what are the things that really influence your perception of an employer. Now, if I'd have asked somebody this in 2019 in China, the answer is, how quickly can I progress and how much money are you going to pay me? In terms of their perception of an employer. And that is changing. People are becoming much more sophisticated about how they make decisions, and it's a good thing. And healthy culture is now the top factor for people in how they perceive an employer brand. And this is great. And the reason it's great from my point of view, for people to reach their full potential in their career, the most important, most fundamental thing they've got to get right is self-awareness. And by self-awareness, what are my strengths? What are my areas for development? What are my preferences in terms of my personality? And what does that mean for the kind of sector, the kind of industry, the business, the kind of culture in a business that I want to be in? And I think particularly in mainland China, in the 10 years I've been in China, I've seen this big shift from super transactional decision-making just around job title and money, as we all know. And it is becoming more sophisticated. And it's great to see, because by doing this, by people being more considered about the truly important things long-term, not a slightly bigger paycheck next month, they're going to end up making better decisions where those decisions work, where they don't jump around to different jobs every 18 months, but they actually stay with an organization, thrive, fail, learn, and then move, and really achieve something and truly progress, not just in their job title, but really as a person. So this is really positive. And of those 21,000 people, these were the main keywords that came up in terms of what are you looking for from either your current employer or from a job move. And it's not just about salary and promotion anymore. It is about these other things. It's about sustainable, healthy growth, sustainable growth. It's about development, real personal development, their skills, their attitude, their mindset, etc. So it's great to see the market becoming more sophisticated. On salary trends, so 85% of people stating that their number one consideration for accepting a job would be earnings. Now that's different to the previous slide, because the previous slide was about employer branding perception. This is actually, if I've got an offer, what's the most important thing? And this year they're saying salary. It normally goes between earnings and progression. Each year it tends to swap over a bit. So they're pretty consistent on that. What's interesting, 45% of respondents expect a 20% increase for changing jobs, 20%. We'll come back to that later. That's an interesting number. And you can see here, top 3 concerns for employees: if they're going to leave a job, why, or if they're going to join a job, why. Career progression, earnings, and job security. And this is new. The job security one is new. Again, if I go back to pre-pandemic, 2019, and I'm sure my colleagues would attest to this as well, when we're talking to candidates, what do you want? I want to work in a startup. I want to have high risk, high reward environment. And it's not completely gone, but the market has totally shifted. People want work-life balance. They want security. They want a healthy culture. So they are becoming more sophisticated. But again, there's a lot of wants there. and a unique opportunity for very ambitious people to really look at the market and go, right, how can I play to my strengths to get that dream job I want? Coming back to this 20% for changing jobs, as an average, unfortunately, it's not going to happen. So, sorry. So as an average, these are the average salary increases our clients are actually paying. So you can see technology there is best, followed by e-commerce, internet, and healthcare. Now, again, these are only averages, okay? And you've got to remember, when we get this data, we're asking our current clients about what they're paying. But we only really work with most of these companies in exec level and middle management. There might be a whole load of junior stuff that's included in here. So you have to look at the data in context. But look again, so there's a disconnect between expectations of candidates and employers. Just be aware of it. But the good news is, for those ambitious, able, committed people who are super driven, there's some super hot areas of the market where you can significantly improve earnings, which I'll talk about in a bit. So here we are. So we've got an industry breakdown, those 5 industries we talked about earlier that we're seeing as the hottest in the market. I just want to give you a bit of commentary on them. Again, don't worry about the numbers. It's more about just the themes. So look, if we look at technology, particularly hot at the moment in digital transformation, I'll show you some of the job types that are coming up as most in demand at the moment. I think one of the other things, one of the jobs that's really in demand at the moment, it's technical people who are really commercial. It's not an easy thing to find. But, you know, Jeanette here runs our tech desk for our Page Exec business. I'm sure that she would attest to this. If you can find a tech guy that really is commercial with amazing communication skills, we could place him in days, him or her. So the tech market's very hot. You can see here some of these numbers in terms of expectations on salaries, annual increments for existing employees, etc. But when you look at the deeper trends here, there's some very hot segments to this particular market. And these are some of the job types and the roles. And look, I don't know about the MBA students you've got at the moment in the current year and what the mix is, or what those individuals are looking to achieve as they progress in their careers. But if tech is a market that's of interest with an MBA, those commercial skills, those communication skills, and that tech savvy, it's a powerful mix. So that's technology. Healthcare and life sciences. So look, when we look at healthcare and life sciences, our lens is heavily skewed towards pharma and biotech, and to a degree, devices as well. Again, heavily focused on the domestic market. And when we look at it, it's the technical roles that are in demand, the chief medical officers, clinical development, regulatory affairs. So it's similar to technology, the heavily technical stuff where there's big demand and low supply. And then again, those commercial leaders. And examples of that, I'm not just talking about business development people and sales people or marketing. I'm talking about, for example, CFOs with IPO experience. It's those perhaps less technical but very commercial industry specialists, very much in demand. And look, we've seen salary increases in certain segments of tech and healthcare life sciences up to 70%. And I'm not saying everybody can achieve that, but there are some really hot pockets to this market because of that supply and demand picture. You can see here some of the roles that we're talking about. Okay, so banking and financial services, again, when our lens on this in terms of China is a lot of it is PE and VC. And again, particularly hot is investment within healthcare and tech. No surprises there. In banking, we're seeing a pretty solid market in front office roles in commercial and investment banking. And the secondary market is also pretty good, particularly research and analysts and also fund managers. So the secondary market is fairly buoyant, but PVC is really the the very hot market here. So that's financial services. Again, some of the roles you can see here. High proportion of people in FS thinking they'll look for a new job. And I think that's particularly tough for banking. You know, banking is becoming harder and harder for them to access the best talent, because they're in a talent war with fintech and other sectors that are seen as a bit more dynamic. So it's tough there at the moment to attract the best. And then in the consumer markets, again, like many of these markets, domestic is strong. Good news is foreign brands are back, and they're starting to build confidence again in redefining their growth strategies for China. Hot sectors, very much food and beverage, particularly with regards to a health and well-being angle. Also smart consumer tech. I think somebody told me this morning that Hill House Capital had made a big investment in Philips in China, with a view to really transforming Philips into more of a smart tech business, a little bit like Haier have done up in Qingdao. So again, we're seeing those trends in the market. And then if you look at the functional picture, e-commerce, omnichannel, GMs, brand GMs, new retail, these are all hot topics at the moment within the consumer sector. Lots of opportunities there. And again, you can see some of those roles, and again, a high proportion of people looking. And look, I think it's worth noting, if you are an MBA grad this year and you are going to be looking, do go into the market with that awareness that it's a competitive market. A lot of people are looking, like we said earlier, about half of those 85% are very active. So it's about being on point in terms of your job search. Right, industrial and manufacturing, this is a pretty big subject. There's lots of sectors to this. Bear with me a moment. I just need to, I think the mouse has disappeared. So when we look at this market, we've really changed how we approach this market from a very traditional discipline focus years ago when we launched it to very much an industry focused setup now. So for example, automotive is very hot at the moment in China. Intelligent automotive, that's autonomous vehicles, it's EV. Someone told me again this morning, 50% of the EV market is China right now, so big opportunities there. And it's not just in auto, it's in the infrastructure that supports it also. Big tech are moving into it. And really where we see the demand is again in R&D and commercial roles. And in this market, again, salary increments can be as high as 30%. So that's one area. Advanced manufacturing is another that we see a lot of activity in at the moment as well. So that's obviously taking more traditional manufacturing operations and automating them. More intelligent supply chain is another one. So there's a lot of markets within the industrial segment that are very hot, and it does tend to be those ones getting disrupted by technology. And again, you've got some of the examples there. Worth noting, supply chain particularly hot in semiconductors right now. So again, that's another example. When you look at the broad market, the picture doesn't reflect some of these specialist segments. Okay, so that's the industry commentary. What I'm going to do finally is just share with you my thoughts on if someone's looking for a job, just some things to think about in terms of doing it right. And then if you're in a job, how do you actively manage your career so you get everything you want? And these would be my thoughts. Like I said earlier, in an environment where employees do demand more from employers, those people who are self-aware, who invest in themselves, people who've got a clear purpose and a clear vision for themselves and their own career, people who are clear on their own values and therefore what kind of business and culture, what kind of job I'm going to really enjoy. That for me is key. And then taking time to invest in your job search to find just that. Because when you find the right home, that's where people do their best work. And that's where they'll be, you know, they'll not just do well and be promoted and earn good money, they'll be more fulfilled in their job as well. And so it's a much more sustainable route to take, which is why I stressed earlier this idea about being more sophisticated, looking at culture as one of the most important things when making a career decision is really important. So choosing the right path, the industry, the company, do the research. And that's lots of things. That's obviously research on the internet. It's using your network. Another one is obviously how to engage with headhunters well. Just a bit of advice on this one. Often people will misunderstand the dynamic of a relationship between a job seeker and a recruitment consultant. So often people will come into it with a transactional mindset that, well, I go and introduce myself and they find me a job and they make their money and I get my job. But it's not the way to go about it. My advice is do your research, pick the agencies you think look right, rather than just applying to loads of adverts. Do your research, look at the different channels, look at the ones that seem to have the most presence, whether it's adverts, whether it's thought leadership within the segment that you're really interested in. Reach out to them, go and meet them, weigh them up. There are some good ones, there are some not so good ones, right? So you need to do that. And the last thing is this give and take relationship. When you meet a recruiter, they're obviously using their network to then offer you options within that network in terms of companies, jobs, etc. Do the same. The most powerful thing a job seeker can do with a recruiter that they've decided, yeah, I trust you, I want to invest in this, is share your network with them as well. And I promise you, they will go the extra mile for you, because that's how their networks and their capability is built. If you help them with that, they will go the extra mile for you. So do look at your relationship with headhunters as a two-way relationship. You don't need to be too protectionist about it, which sometimes people make the mistake of doing that. The other thing on choosing headhunters, think about your target market. So for example, if I'm looking in China and I'm open to both domestic, privately held Chinese tech firms, but I'm also open to some multinational tech firms, look at your mix of recruiters that you want to invest in those relationships. Go with a large multinational that has a good presence in the foreign market, but also talk to some of those local domestic players that perhaps have a stronger network in the privately held enterprise market in China. And then, of course, come to us because we're strong in both. But the key is prioritize, okay? So just a few comments on job search. On branding, let me give you an example. So we internally have a way with our customers, our clients and candidates, of understanding the likelihood of that individual either looking to hire or that individual looking for a new job. And it's done through their digital footprint. It's done through interactions. It's articles they read and like. It's inquiries they make. You know, all of this digital information tells you a lot about somebody. So again, having a really slick digital footprint, really good profiles on LinkedIn, etc. You know, when you're reading articles and liking them and engaging, all of this stuff builds your presence in the market. And you're much more likely, by investing in that digital footprint, to get spotted by the right people who then can help you. So that's just something to be aware of. Being active digitally is really, really important. And then I guess my final comment is a pretty simple one. How do you manage your career long term? Well, I'm going to come back to this person, able, ambitious, committed, hungry individual who really wants to max out their career and progression. The key is self-awareness. Know yourself. Know what you're good at. Know what you need to improve on. Don't be afraid of that. It's good to fail. It's good to do stuff that's uncomfortable and fail from it and learn from it. And that's ultimately how you improve yourself. It's how you grow your resilience. So ultimately here, what I'm talking about is mindset. I'm sure many of you will know about that idea from that book, but people who have a growth mindset, people who are self-aware, people who plan well, like I said earlier, they're clear on their values and what kind of culture and organization they want to work in, and then investing in that process to find that dream job. They're the people that tend to go all the way. It's not by accident. So I think that's it from me. So thank you very much for listening. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Yes. So are we that super able, committed, and what was it? Ambitious individual?
Ambitious, able, and committed.
Ambitious, able, and committed. Yes. So do we have any questions for Rupert?
Hi, Rupert. Thank you so much for the insightful presentation. I have a question that just sprung up in my mind. So let's say, take for example, Michael Page in Greater China area. In terms of your clients, how, just a rough, let's say percentage, how many of your clients would you say are domestic locals, for example, and what's the percentage of international staying in China, for example?
Do you mean the candidates we place as opposed to the clients
Candidates.
hiring?
Sorry,
No, it's okay.
candidates. Yeah.
99%, probably, maybe 99.5, all Chinese talent.
Local.
Yeah. Yeah, look, that shifted. 10 years ago, it was probably 5-10% foreigners, but that's rare now. I'm very rare. Yeah, so and look, why is that? Initially, I think we saw a trend from sort of 2011 to 2015, where some of that stuff was around foreign firms perceiving that by hiring local talent will save costs. But what we've seen evolve since then is there's just loads of good talent in China. And so firms obviously want to take advantage of that. Very well educated, can do, great work ethic. It's a strong market for companies to invest in, whether you're a privately held firm in China or whether you're a foreign firm.
I see, Jimmy, you have something to say to that.
Well, I was just going to ask Rupert if you think maybe that final 1% will be killed off by the tax laws that will change next year, or any thoughts on the?
I'm not a tax expert, but I certainly hope not. Certainly hope I don't get killed off. But look, let's see. Those tax laws, they're not entirely clear yet as to what they actually mean, so we'll wait and find out. And I think it has implications also for local Chinese as well to a degree. So we need to watch that one. Thank you.
Yes, anyone? Before we go on, okay,
Please.
Ellen?
Just wondering, how does one get into the right headhunter's portfolio?
Oh.
Well, like I said, I think self-awareness. What is it that you really want to do? And again, what I mean by that is my advice is do what you love doing. Don't do what you think other people expect you to do. That's a route to failure. So pick those things that you really want to do, that really feel right for you, and then go and research. And that can be internet research. It can be talking to your network. Who are the recruiters that are strong in this? Who do you recommend? Go on their websites, go on LinkedIn. How much advertising are they doing within the niche that you're targeting? And then go after those relationships. And going after those relationships is much more than just applying to a job. If they don't respond, pick up the phone, talk to them, turn up at their office if you need to. No, seriously, it's rare, but we still get it occasionally. Someone will walk in going, I'd like to talk to somebody, please. It's very rare. But if you're not getting the access you want to that recruiter, just go and see them. I know it sounds scary, but I promise you, you will get their attention. Yeah.
Well, I just want to wrap up tonight and with we call it our CEIBS ambassador. This is our CEIBS Teddy. Yes, and this is
That's very kind.
Hai Chi Oolong tea from my
Oh, lovely.
hometown, Taiwan.
Oh, lovely. Thank
Yes,
you very much.
yes.